for joining us here this morning on a beautiful day in Cork. My name is Sharon Hughes. I am the Leadership Academy Manager for the Wheel, Ireland's National Association for Community and Voluntary Sector Charities and Social Enterprises. I'm joined by a number of my colleagues here this morning and also by Claire McAvilly of Airfield Estate and of John Smith of Nano Nagle. So the Leadership Academy is a project of the Wheel and it came about after a lot of consultation with leaders in the sector about what they needed to resource themselves. And it's a space for people to learn and connect and hopefully take the next stage on their leadership journey, whatever that might be. And one of the ways that we've been trying to do this is by having regular events like this where leaders can get together, listen to other leaders and some of the challenges that they face in their day-to-day, and then to connect with other leaders in the space and hopefully grow a wider community. And so this morning we're talking about the theme of Leaders and Legacies, and it actually was triggered by John, because we were having a conversation about your strategic plan, and John was saying, we really need to think about what Nano was planning when she set up the centre. And it really struck me because we all talk about, we're all constantly thinking about leaving behind our own legacies. So John had started this initial conversation, and the thought, and then we met Claire. We had a staff day at an Airfield estate in Dundrum, which is beautiful, and you really should visit if you get a chance. She was telling us a story about the O'Brien sisters and about their legacy that they had left. And I just thought there's such an interesting conversation between these two, and they both very kindly agreed to join us. And then John gave us the beautiful room, so thank you so much first and foremost. So I'll introduce the speakers and then we'll ask them some questions. I will stick to time, I promise, because I know how valuable everybody's time is. So John Smith is a graduate of UCC, where he studied in economics and computers, and he also did a diploma in information systems and accounting. He returned to full-time education and completed his master's in social science, and then he moved into international development, where his passion for development, education, campaigning and communications led to a career spanning 18 years in 5 different roles across Trover. Most recently, John joined Nano Nagle in Cork as their CEO, where he continues to drive social justice projects. And Claire McAvilly is a graduate of UCC, and she's from Dublin, which apparently is a big deal.
Rare breed. Yeah. Dublin came to UCC when no one from Dublin came to college anymore.
And it seems to have studied very well. Yes. So she studied nutrition science and is passionate about food and getting people to reconnect with where their food comes from. She landed her dream job, we were talking about that earlier, as CEO of Airfield Estate, a leading Dublin tourist attraction and Dublin Sustainable Food Hub in January 2022. Prior to that, she worked in communications roles in the UK and Ireland for a range of organisations. She's a member of the Safe Food Advisory Board, strategic advisor to BLab, and chair of the advisory panel of All Ireland Science Media Centre. So it's always weird here with your own bio right there, isn't it? Yeah. The little round of applause, thank you very much. So I have the privilege of hearing both the stories. John, we start with you. Thank you for having us. Great to be as close to the topic, like physically as we are. So can you tell us a bit about yourself, and please can you tell us as well about Nano, who is, by the way, all around us, who she was and how you got met.
Okay, thanks so much. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Thanks so much, Sharon. Yeah, so first thing, you're all very welcome to Nano Nagle Place. Delighted to have everyone here to host you this morning. So it is a bit cringy here in your bio, but anyway, I'll elaborate a bit maybe on it. So I worked in the private sector first, went to UCC as well, and worked for about 7 years in the private sector. I was about 4 years into it when I knew it wasn't for me. I was enjoying it when I knew it wasn't for me, and shifted then into the area of, I suppose, youth and community development initially, and got a real passion for global citizenship, development, education. And I was always interested in global issues, but that kind of led me in there. And I had initially intended on travelling for a few years, but saw a job for an education officer in Trover that really sparked my interest. And as Sharon has alluded to there, that really set me off on a career path within Trover, where it was a real privilege really to work in Trover. I had the opportunity of meeting inspirational people in many of the countries where we worked, and really enjoyed my career there. And what really, I suppose, struck with me and stayed with me the most about my time with Trover is the people. The people you meet, whether it's in Honduras, in Myanmar, in Gaza, in places all over the world, or in the corridors of the people you meet and the intention and passion they bring to the work. So I never regretted it, I never looked back. And I was ready for a change. I had really enjoyed my time in Cork, but I was ready for a change. And I saw the job here in Nano Nagle Place, and I was familiar with it, but of course I needed to become more deeply familiar with it. And if you haven't been up around the site, please do at some stage this morning, go around the site, because there's a pulse to the place, there's an energy to the place, and I was immediately, I suppose, encapsulated by it and interested in it. And that's what led me to Nano Nagle Place. And so I'm not a newbie anymore. I'm here since January. I had to stop saying that, I think in June or July. I was saying to some of the guys earlier. But and I suppose Nano Nagle Place then, I mean, there's such a rich history, and we'll have an opportunity, Sharon, to elaborate on that. But we're going on 250 years here. It's such a historic part of Cork, and it was started by one woman who was a woman who had means 250 years ago, who had been educated in France, who had spent many of her formative years from the age of 10 to 28 in France, but saw an injustice when she came home after her dad died, came home, and at the time of the penal laws in Ireland, where it was illegal for children to be educated, it was illegal for Catholic children to be educated, she saw an injustice and she was moved by it. And I suppose that's where it all began. And back in 2017, Nano Nagle Place opened after a huge refurb, a huge reinvestment. And this is the spiritual home of the presentation order, and I might say a little bit more about that.
We will, yes, that. Thanks so much. And here, Nano Nagle is kind of, can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, perfect. Nano Nagle is kind of obvious because it's called after what it is, but Airfield is a little bit more subtle. It was a gift to the local community by the Overend sisters. So can you give us a brief background on yourself and the Overend sisters and how you guys came together?
Yeah, so as I said, made a very strategic decision to come to UCC to study nutrition. Clearly, it was, I'd like to say it was probably the best decision that I ever made, because not only did I get to spend 4 amazing years here, but I also landed the court husband, which, and the court mother-in-law. But nutrition is my passion. I've always worked in nutrition roles. Spent many years in Cambridge working for the UK Special Advisor on obesity, so really trying to bring in evidence base to tackle some of the big public health issues that we're facing. Moved back to Dublin, worked in ECD for a while, and then went to Danone, so very corporate. And spent 5 years there, so obviously Danone, big global multinational beast of an organisation with a real significant presence here in Ireland. So 2 factories in Macroom and Wexford that are producing about 80% of Danone's infant formula for the globe. So the French company was very much Irish focused. Did that for a couple of years and then joined the board of Airfield. So for those people who haven't heard of us before, we are literally 3 minutes from Dundrum Town Centre. And I'm sure you are all heard about Dundrum Town Centre. We are a 38-acre urban farm and gardens. So we are milking every day, we're collecting the eggs, we're doing tons of things around and getting kids to reconnect with where their food comes from. And for us, it's really about, so our ambition is to be Dublin's sustainable food hub, and we're really about how we can bring it to life, really, and certainly how we can connect people with where their food comes from. So in terms of why we're there and how we're there, so as Sharon said, in the late 1800s, a family called the Overends they bought the property from the Jewry family, as in the Jewry hotels. And they lived there. It was their family home, and it was initially two daughters, and sadly the second daughter died about a year that they moved out to Dundrum. 20 years later, a third daughter was born, and one of the most interesting things is that Trevor, the dad, made a decision to leave the estate to the women, not to Downton Abbey style, some random male cousin somewhere, but to the women. So that was completely unheard of. And the 2 ladies then had this amazing life. They were very fortunate. Their uncle had set up the Indian Stock Exchange, and he too had never married. So he left the sisters the equivalent of €5 million at the time. So, but they weren't ostentatious, and they were very much invested in supporting the local community. And they both never married, which is another interesting. I like to say, if there's a bloke on the scene, there's no way 38 acres in South Dublin would be left to the people of Ireland. Absolutely not. And they, in 1974, decided to leave the estate to the people of Ireland. So very much ahead of their time, but with a very clear charter. We were set up for education and recreation purposes only. And the second sister, they were mad. They were amazing, but also things like they were really into their cars. So we have three beautiful vintage cars, including a 1926 Rolls Royce, fully taxed, fully insured, fully drivable. It'll be going to the wedding fair at the RDS in January. I have this ambition to drive it in St. Patrick's Day Parade, but clearly I've been told no, too dodgy. So they, at the time, if you had a Rolls Royce, you had to have a mechanic. So the two ladies, off they went to the UK and trained to be able to look after their own roads. So they were amazing. We also did things like the Laurel Inn, the Children's Hospice. They gifted the land that the Laurel Inn is built on. Like, just unbelievable women.
We could literally talk about them for that. Like, I was Googling them, and their mum actually is particularly, she's really interesting. Their mother's name was Lily. I think it's really important we use their names because that's what we're talking about today. Is like, obviously your guys' journey, but also the fact that you have these three people who had this vision for what they wanted to give to the people of Ireland. And just I just asked you to zone in on, like, when you said that they wanted it to be education and, like, what was their vision for it and how has that evolved?
So I don't think they actually quite knew, and certainly there was a lot of legal advice at the time, so it was very much around the fact that they wanted just to give the opportunity for people to be able to come on the estate, and that is very much, it's evolved today, but very much like John, we spent a lot of time making decisions and going, what would the family think about these decisions? We are first and foremost a visitor attraction. We bring about 250,000 people onto the estate, but we have to make money. And that's very challenging for my team, who, you don't work in Airfield for the money. You work in Airfield because you're passionate about farming and gardening.
Yeah, it was very interesting as well because their mother insisted they volunteer, even though they were actually like loaded into the stock exchange. So they were like driving ambulances for St. John's ambulance. It's just interesting that they had that core as well. And John, same question for Nano. Like obviously there's things like you can't imagine what she'd say if she walked in today. But what was her vision when she started, when she set this up?
Well, I mean, I think it's really interesting what Claire just said, because obviously Nano was lived 250 years ago, right? So and there's been books written, we have letters, there's been plays developed. So that gives us an insight into the history and into Nano's life. But I think what Claire said was spot on. My interpretation of Nano Nagle was she wasn't looking too far ahead originally. She saw an injustice and was really full of conviction. Something had to be done. And when you think about it, she started with one school, one small school right here on this site, and didn't know where she was going to go from that. And was really and this is something I often remind myself as a leader, was taking on the conventions of her time. She knew this was dangerous. Her family was telling her, this is dangerous. Her family were wealthy, that we could all be at risk if you keep doing this. What are you thinking of? But she kept going. And it was like one school, it was two schools. And within a few years, it was 7 schools. And then it was like, well, we need to grow this. How am I going to do it? So what many people don't know is, and I found this, when I found this out first, I found it fascinating. So she became professed as a nun when she was 57. So very late in her life, her conviction was education. How are we going to educate young Irish children where it's illegal to do so, or young Irish Catholic children at the time? So she was full of the sense of challenging and injustice. And then it was like, well, what's the next step? And I think to be true to her legacy, faith was really important to her. Her faith, she was, raised in hedge schools. Faith was very much part of her upbringing, and it was something she also brought into her schools, a catechism. She felt that children needed this, from a perspective of her own life and looking to the future. But I suppose an interesting step as well, Sharon, is she said, how am I going to grow this? I can't do it on my own. I know what I'll do. I'll bring 4 women to France and who get professed in the Ursulines over there, because I'm familiar with the Ursulines, and they'll come back here and they'll grow it. We get more schools. So I think the vision kind of evolved, evolved over time. And something I may come to a little bit later, when I talk to I went to Newfoundland in June, where the presentation order, which was what was founded here on this site 250 years ago, are now in 20 countries around the world, right? And their vision and their mission was education. And when I spoke to all of them, many of them said Nano's mission, vision, and her courage was amazing. But it was the women who came after her and what they continued on. They shouldn't be lost in the story. So I think even when we're, as you said, when we're here to talk about those of us who find ourselves in leadership positions, that responsibility of carrying on is, I think, a big part of the story.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're hoping to touch on today. So I suppose you're both so respectful of that's one of the things I enjoyed about talking to both of you. Like, they're like living, breathing, like you can almost hear you as if you're talking to them, you know, what would Nano do and what would the other brands do? Like, how do you keep them alive? Like, how do you keep those legacies forefront while being respectful of the work that people are doing now?
Yeah. For me, I think one of the things that really struck me when I came in here and that I really respected, and I think is something some organizations spend years trying to do, is there were a couple of core ideas at the heart of what Nano Nagle Place is about. And for me, and my colleagues, as I started to talk to them, I was like, they get these ideas quickly. A place of welcome, a place of inclusion, and education. So we have 8 values, but those 3 central ideas are at the heart of everything. So for me, you know, that's what Nano stood for. She didn't overcomplicate it. She said, these are the important things. And those ideas have stood the test of time. And I think, you know, whatever organizations we work for, if you compare it back, and if there are some central ideas at the center and that everyone will buy into them, it can really help to kind of continue that legacy. And for me, that was a key thing, that she had real conviction about those central ideas. There was no deviating from that. And I think that was the power behind how there was momentum and how things grew and how people got on board and people helped her.
Yeah, and you've obviously written those into your practice. You said there's 8.
Yeah, so we have 8 values, and they, like hospitality, or what we welcome, is one of them, and it's front and center. And when you meet, like when I met presentation sisters and lay people, because the presentation order has changed over the years, and I met them all in Newfoundland, in Canada, you know, they all talk about the same central ideas. There are other ideas, like the values include collaboration, creativity, justice, excellence, but the central ideas that underpin everything are fundamental.
You weren't as lucky. You didn't get a rule book. So how are you interpreting while keeping what you hope is that legacy alive?
Yeah, so we didn't get a rule book. I suppose when I joined, and I'm there 2 years in January, we have a board and we have a trust. The trust previously were people who were friends of the family, and that was great, but sadly those people have moved on. So we now have trustees and board members who never knew them or never had that connection. But very similar to John, we too have their legacy built into our values. But we find ourselves now at this critical juncture where we're thinking, is the charter too narrow? So education and recreation, it means that for certain funding opportunities, we're not in a position to go for them. And so also having a board and a trust governance-wise is a bit of a pain in the neck. So we're now looking at how can we merge the two, because the thinking is if you were setting up a charity today, you would never have those 2 structures. So we're thinking about how we can evolve, merge the 2 together, but also then look at the brief from the board to me is, yes, absolutely, they want us to be a top Dublin tourist attraction, but they want us to go outside the 4 walls of Dundrum, be a leading voice in food sustainability, be advocating for change around food, and that's particularly interesting now when we are totally independent and we're very passionate about the fact that we have the farming community on one side and the environmentalists on the other. Where is the voice sense? Because we need farmers, because we need food. And could Airfield play that kind of intermediary role, bring groups of people together to see if we can really change the I suppose the lack of understanding that urban-rural divide now is massive. You know, can Airfield have a role in that space? And that's when you think, that's what the sisters would want.
Yeah, and actually you have to tell them about your youth board.
Yeah, so classic new CEO, the board were like, oh sure Claire, you know, we have a few youngsters on the board. And I said, no, it wouldn't work. And so we made a decision to set up Airfield's first youth board. We ran a national campaign, and we now have 12 people aged between 15 and 18. Their job is to advise me and our established board to bring that youth voice to the decisions that we're making, because we'll all be well gone. But also we've been working with Bite Back. So Bite Back is Jamie Oliver's campaigning charity in the UK, the school meals, Marcus Rashford campaign. So what can our 12 do? What can they be campaigning for? That can't come from me, it has to come from them. And what they're thinking about is some kind of campaign around kind of what I talked about, how do we get our young people to reconnect with the farming community? What could our youth board do? But also we have a youth activism officer, Caitlin, so she's a permanent member of staff. Her job is to look after the youth board. And she was recently selected by the Department of Ag to represent Ireland at the World Food Forum in Rome. She was there hanging out with Michael D for the week. So a little urban farm in Dublin is really kind of starting to be at the forefront of having a seat at the table in terms of how we can really change food sustainability in Ireland.
And it's not without its challenges, isn't it not? Because you see, I think when most of us think about maybe, it's very inspiring to take Nano Nagle Plan on this, she just thought there's a problem, I need to actually step into that. So anyone who's thinking about filling a gap, you can imagine how it might, big things come from small ideas. You guys are mid-legacy, you're not starting one, and you're hopefully not finishing it, all going well. So you're in the middle, so it's interesting that you have that eye on continuing it with the youth board. And they're challenging you, aren't they? Along with other challenges, but it was an interesting.
Yeah, they said we should be selling Christmas trees this year. Christmas trees is a revenue stream for us, but it's not sustainable to put down a Christmas tree. So we are not selling Christmas trees, and we are doing it. So for anyone who has that tricky person in your life, what you like for Christmas, we have a pay to plant scheme, so you can buy a tree at Airfield, we'll do a planting day in the spring, and so that idea totally came from the youth board. The other really interesting thing about them, when they met for the first time, they themselves had a whole conversation about restorative practice, like what would happen if they disagreed amongst the 12, like how would they deal with that? And they were just amazing. And so at every board meeting, one of them comes to update the board, and like literally they were talking this restorative practice piece work, and you can see my board going, we shouldn't be doing that ourselves. So they're just amazing.
Yeah, but it's so admirable that you decided you were going to do that, but you committed to it, because sometimes it's lovely to do these things on paper, but then they come in and say, right, we've decided we're not selling Christmas trees, and that's so serious, if that is your mainstream of revenue. John, what would be some challenges that you're facing? Because I'd say the cost of running these, times have changed a lot, and so there is obviously upkeep and governance challenges as well, like you mentioned. So how are you finding managing that?
Well, we're no different to any charity, right? Like Nano Nagle Place, that's the first thing that's important. Nano Nagle Place is a charity, of course, it's a company, it's limited by guarantee, so it's been set up in that way. So it's no different to any other charity in the challenges it faces. It has to fund itself, it has to run as a non-profit, and everything that goes with it. And some of us were talking last night of the challenges that come for charities even with compliance, right? And it's essential the standards that we hold ourselves to and that the sector holds ourselves to, but that comes with a lot of burden, it comes with a lot of work, it comes with a lot of time and resource. But I think the key thing is finding the balance though, and something Claire mentioned there as well, I think that is important for me to share from a Nano Nagle Place perspective is finding that youth voice. So on the one hand, you're having to run efficiently, and I'll say a little bit more in a while about how Nano Nagle Place is a charity, but it's very much a social enterprise as well. And there's so much going on here, and it's quite unique from that perspective, from my point of view. But when you think about the youth voice, one thing I wanted to share and mention, if people didn't know about it, is an issue that we're quite prominent on, and we do quite a lot of work on, is on migrant issues. So the Cork Migrant Centre is based here. But it is very much a project within Nano Nagle Place. Now what's interesting, it existed, it was set up by the Presentation Sisters back in 2006, but then it came into Nano Nagle Place when that became a charity back in 2017, 2018. But just this year, the Cork Migrant Centre and Nano Nagle Place played a lead role in having the first anti-racism summit in the City Hall here in Cork. And it was, in all my years working on social justice issues, it was one of the best events I went to because it was an authentic youth-led voice. It was youth-led from the planning, and I was inspired just to, listening to Claire as to what you guys are doing, bringing in that youth voice. And that is essential. Having that youth voice, as leaders, I think, having that youth voice challenge us, and also take on the issues of today. Because one thing we often say is, what would Nano Nagle do today? And there's no doubt in my mind, anyone with conviction who would stand up to a social justice system of our time today would say inclusion, the challenge for refugees, for asylum seekers and migrants, that is such an important issue. We have to be a voice on it. And what we're doing right now is we're developing a strategic plan, which we'll be launching early next year for 5 years. And the sense of voice, empowerment, and that youth voice will be front and center in one of the pillars in that. And to come back to what you said then, but again, we have to fund what we do. And a site like this, it's 3.5 acres. So when you walk around and you see all the buildings, it costs money to run a place like this. So we have to find a balance. We're going to have to diversify our income streams over the coming years. We're going to have to get creative. We're going to have to reach out to stakeholders we didn't in the past, tell them this good news story, and invite them in to be part of it. Invite them in to help us to support it, to make sure it's sustainable. So that's a big challenge. One of our 4 pillars in the next 4 to 5 years will be strength and sustainability. So it'll be up there front and center with the social justice work, with running the museum, with the actual site here, and having that sense of welcome for people coming in from Cork, and from all over Ireland.
Dublin.
Not just
I love it, and I think what's in, so the point of the Leadership Academy is to talk to leaders. And I think what's so interesting about both of you is you are both leaders, but you both are not necessarily in the shadow, but there are certainly, very big personalities around you. So how do you manage that balance of your own leadership, and I use the word ambition because I don't think it's a dirty word, so your own leadership ideals and the vision for Nano Nagle, which will live on past you and Airfield. So, John, will you take that one?
Yeah, I do, when I talk about this, I do be, very honest, there is a sense of responsibility, right? When you have someone like Nano Nagle who set up this centre here, who initiated the whole idea, presentation order grew from it, and now we have this, it is really a home for presentation sisters all over the world and for the social justice work that now exists in 20 countries, and they very much see it as the spiritual home. I suppose for me as a leader, I think, when I think back to Nano Nagle and what I alluded to earlier, I think she was authentic. She was herself, she was true to herself and what she could bring, and that's what I tried to do, to bring my own strengths, my own experiences, and to bring my own style. I think it's really important as leaders that we bring what we believe in, what has shaped us. Many of the things that have shaped me have been leaders I've encountered over the years. So I'm sure many people here, I've been really inspired by leaders I've met over the years. People who have taken me under their wing and maybe saw something in me and encouraged me as well. And I think one of the best things I did is listen to those leaders, but at the same time develop your own authentic style. And then I think to find an organisation where there's that fit. And I suppose when I came here, I felt there's a sense of fit. I felt I could bring something that was of value. I could make a contribution, and then you're continuing the legacy. But I think not losing sight of that, what you bring as an individual and all your experiences is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the idea of kind of co-creation, or kind of partnership between the legacy that's ongoing and your leadership. It's nice that they intertwine. What about you, Claire?
So, to be completely honest, I think it's a massive struggle, and certainly when you come in as the new CEO. And when you also come into an organisation that is struggling financially, and I know definitely when I came in, she's going to know the big corporate now, she's going to be selling ourselves, and putting a McDonald's in the front field, that kind of vibe. And so really, like John, we too have been working for the past 2 years on our new strategy. I think that was the first thing, that had to be built. It can't just be my vision from the top. Spent a lot of time working on that together, also involving, as you can imagine, the local community in how we develop. And so I'm the leader, but I'm kind of more of the facilitator. I suppose that's the way that I see it. And me at my best is when there's people on my team who, at all levels, are leading, coming up with something themselves and making it happen. So we have this guy who only works on a Sunday. He's studying environmental science, and he was like, Claire, like, what about bat walks? Like, could we do bat walks? And we had, there was a nighttime economy grant, so from the Department of Tourism for museums to allow us to try things in and to see would they generate revenue. So, well, sure, look, we put it into the grant, and you know, we won't necessarily, we haven't spent any money because the grant was covered. Anyway, we were successful, so the grant, we did the bat walks, we have a beautiful cookery school, so we did chocolate making, and we had a partnership with the Royal Irish Academy of Music. We had an event for their young musicians. The bat walks sold out in 20 minutes. I had 400 people on a waiting list to come see the bloody bats. And that was great, like a guy who works on the ticket desk. So it was amazing. So we're now at the point where there's another grant, this time in heritage and biodiversity, and I'm like, right, great, what's next? So he's back to me, he's like, so when I don't know if you realise this, when the M50 was being built, a badger set was moved and put in Airfield, okay? Random. So Craig's like, after getting spied, what do they call now, snake cameras. There's pipes that come out where the badger set is, so Craig's putting these cameras down, and he's putting cameras in the trees, and we're going to have this live feed, and that to me is true leadership. Like, it's not me, it's when people on your team deliver for you, which is just amazing.
I love it. I kind of want to go with that one. I thought there was going to be costumes actually to start. We're coming up to the end, so I always ask people, what is your favourite piece or your best piece of leadership advice that you got that you stick in your brain?
Yeah, so there's another amazing leadership program, called Common Purpose, which I did a long time ago. And the way that it works is you're in a group of amazing leaders and you move around, you work together for like 6 months and you meet other amazing leaders. So we were in City Hall in Belfast, and the CEO was, telling us his story. And we're in this beautiful room. The furniture was built at the same time as the Titanic, so it's just like stunning furniture. And he's like, very difficult conversations have gone on in this room that I've been part of. And sometimes I just say to my team, Fido, not like Fido, fucking drive on. I swear to God, that's about 15 years ago, and I literally sit there sometimes in work going, Fido. Like, it's just sometimes, and sometimes the pace is slow, but we have to keep going, we have to keep driving on, especially for Airfield. We're so lucky to have it, and we're at the moment, we're trying to obviously meet every politician that we can. We're clearly meeting a lot of Cork politicians who are like, oh, if only you were in Cork now, Claire. I'm like, I know, but we really have to look after Airfield, and certainly very similar to John, we have to look at what how we diversify our revenue streams, how we also look at the international visitor. You know as well as I do, there's 90 cruise ships coming into Dunleary, they're all heading to the Guinness Storehouse. Why aren't they coming to beautiful Airfield? So really trying to think about our own kind of commercial success.
I love that. And John, your best leadership advice?
Yeah, I think it's building on something Claire said earlier. Someone said to me a good few years ago, and I have to explain this right because you can't get it wrong, but like when you're like, everything is about your team, right? Your colleagues, and you're not going to be successful unless you've got a strong team around you and unless you're all on the same page. I played a lot of sports throughout my life. I learned that in so many different ways, that if you have the right people in your team, and I've seen that as well, not just saying it, I've met all the wheel team now last night and today, and you can see when a team are really together and have each other's back. There's nothing like it. But a leader said to me years ago, look, when you're hiring, competence is so important, but you cannot compromise on character. So get the people who are right for you, for your team, and for your organisation. Make sure you have the competencies, but never lose sight of the character, because if you get it wrong, it's very hard to fix. So team is front and centre for me, but that advice will stay with me.
That's a very good one, and we see coming a lot with skills-based interviews and moving away from technical proficiency. I can see people kind of go, so I'm going to actually take a couple of questions if anybody has one. We have probably a few minutes. Does anyone have a question for? Yeah, here we go. Here, I'll jump this.
Hi, I'm Liam from the Dino Food. It's been great listening to both of you, but I just want to acknowledge what Airfield is doing. I was up 3 years ago at a Christmas event with my kids, and it's just extraordinary what has emerged out. So, and you can really feel there's so much diversity, so much happening there. I'm really curious because it's very clear listening to you that you're really you're focused on revenue, generating revenue, and being sustainable yourself. I'm not hearing that you're looking for charity, and maybe it's coming with your corporate lens. But I'd be really interested in knowing what percentage of your revenue is being self-generated, and what has that meant for the organisation and your own confidence, I suppose, in your own sustainability.
So, the reality is that we're broke, okay? To start with that. We are very fortunate. We sold some land in the boom for a lot of money, and we bought it back in the crash. And all of that money is invested in sustainable funds. About 85% of it is invested in ESGs. We're drawing down too much of the fund. We've about 7 years left. And there's a certain vibe sometimes of, sure, we're loaded. I'm like, we're not, because we are drawing down too much. So that means that we've spent a lot of time on a big budget finance committee meeting on Monday, trying to look at what our break-even plan will look like over the next 3 to 4 years. So in terms of looking at, as I talked about, the current revenue streams, how we can maximise those, but also new ones. So for example, we've just been awarded Research Institute status by the Department of Education. That means we can take money, EU funding, to do research projects. So that's amazing. There's tons of money in the EU, especially for the work that we're doing. But it also means, so grants is a big one. The other revenue stream we're looking at is sponsorship, which will be challenging because we will never be Tato Airfield. And you know as well as I do, if you're bringing a corporate in, they want their name in lights, most of them do. So we're really trying to look at how we develop that sponsorship opportunity, but at the same time, not compromising the beautiful Airfield and what we're all about. So, this year we got a lovely check from a US software business, restaurant software business, to build a community garden. So we opened that last month. But certainly the pressure is on. I definitely feel it, but also at the same time, and I find it really interesting because a lot of companies are now saying they want to be more purpose-led, but then the non-for-profit sector needs to become more commercial. So where's the lovely happy place in the middle, especially because we're under huge scrutiny from the revenue. So a really good example, a couple of years ago before my time, the revenue looked at us and said, you do weddings. What's that got to do with your charitable mission? It kind of went away. I think it was the time the charities regulation was getting going, but I know that we've had endless conversations about how we can't be seen to be too commercial, yet we need more money to save the place. So it's definitely a struggle. I'm currently recruiting for a new commercial director. But I think at the same time, what the board and the trust feel is there's a lovely understanding. It's not about getting it down to zero. They're very happy to give us the interest off the fund, but we're a good few years from that. So it's definitely what keeps you awake at night. So,
John, do you have anything similar?
It's such a similar story. It's great going back and forth with Claire, and we had an interesting conversation along those lines. I think the perception when I actually told my doctor, I'm joining Nano Nagle Place, he was like, what? And sure, you work for Troker, and I was like, yeah, Nano Nagle Place is a charity. Is it? I love that place. But Nano Nagle Place is a success story, and its brand has evolved since 2017, 2018. But as a popular culture event, as a place that's really beautiful to visit, and there is a sense of, we know some of the social justice work and the good work, but our story is very similar to Claire's. We have to be sustainable, and we have events that will happen in 5-6 years that mean we have to change our income stream. We have to diversify our income streams. So one of the first things myself and the team did was develop a funding strategy 6 months into my time here, because we know what's on the horizon. And I really resonate with what Claire was saying. Similar challenges for us, because you're trying to find a balance between bringing in that sense of you're a charity, you need to be supported, you're thinking about corporates, you're thinking about philanthropy and all that, and at the same time presenting yourself as we're about social justice. This is our ethos, this is at the heart of what we do. But there's so much else goes on around the site. It's a big challenge for us because a lot of what we talk about in charities now is brand. What do people know you for? What's the first thing they think about when they think about your organisation? And right now we're funded by leasing out buildings to UCC and to you, the Good Day Deli. We lease that out. We get some grants in. But Nano Nagle Place has never done fundraising. But we're going to do fundraising going forward because we have to make sure that we're sustainable into the future. And that will be a pillar in our strategy. So I think very similar to Claire's story, we're on a very similar journey.
Well, for now, this portion of the event is over, but how fantastic are Claire and John, great applause.